After my grandfather passed away, the entire family gathered in the luxurious meeting room to hear the announcement of the asset division. Everyone was certain they would be the rightful heirs, while I, the adopted child, was just there to be the butt of the joke. But right at the moment they were mocking me, I placed a sealed file on the table that had been locked away for many years. And as the lawyer began reading each word aloud, the entire room fell into dead silence. My father, uncle, and brother went berserk like cornered wild animals. Hello, my name is Wesley Stone. I'm 32 years old and currently the CEO of Heritage Stone International, a multinational conglomerate spanning industries from food to retail chains and logistics, with its headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. If you saw me now, sitting in my gleaming glass office on the top floor, with the city twinkling with lights below, you might think I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, that everything came to me as easily as my surname Stone suggests. But the truth is far from that. My life is a long story, full of scars, times when I was sidelined, and moments when I had to grit my teeth to prove my worth. Today, I want to tell you that story, starting from the very beginning when I was just a lost boy in the very home I called family. I am adopted. That's the first thing you need to know about me. I don't remember anything about my biological parents. I only know that I was adopted when I was just a few months old. The Stone family who brought me home was a prestigious, wealthy lineage with Heritage Stone International as the symbol of their success. But don't rush to think that growing up in a family like that was a dream. For me, it was a relentless battle where I had to fight to be recognized, to be seen as a human being rather than an outsider. My grandfather, Virgil Stone, was the founder of the conglomerate. He was a stern man with eyes as sharp as knives and a deep, resonant voice that commanded respect from anyone. He never smiled easily, but to me, he was the only light in those dark days. He saw something in me that I myself hadn't yet realized, but not everyone in the family thought like him. My adoptive father, Gerald, my uncle Albert, and my brother Cole, they never saw me as a true part of the Stone family. I still remember my childhood days clearly when I was only 7 or 8 years old, running after my grandfather through the supermarkets and warehouses of Heritage Stone. Those trips weren't just work, they were my world. Grandfather would point to each shelf, each truck, and explain, "Wesley, success isn't in the numbers on paper. It's here, in how we serve every customer and how we keep our promises to them." I listened intently, my eyes wide with wonder, feeling like I was being taught a great secret. He taught me about discipline, about honor, and about never giving up. In those moments, I felt like I belonged here, like I was part of his legacy. But it was precisely in those times that the conflicts in my family began to simmer. Gerald, my adoptive father, always looked at me with cold eyes. He was a tall man, in expensive suits and with a forced smile, but I knew he didn't like me. Once I overheard him speaking to my adoptive mother, Helen, in the vast kitchen of the mansion. "That boy will never be our son. He's just a decoration. Don't let anyone give him illusions." I stood there in the corner of the kitchen, clutching the notebook grandfather had given me, trying not to let the tears fall. Uncle Albert, Gerald's younger brother, was even worse. He didn't hesitate to mock me right to my face. "Wesley, who do you think you are? One day you'll be kicked out of here, back to where you belong, nowhere." And Cole, the son of my adoptive parents, who was 2 years younger than me, took the most pleasure in hurting me. He had a handsome face, golden blonde hair, and the confidence of someone born knowing he would inherit everything. Cole often called me Scrap, or the pickup kid right in front of his friends. Once at my own birthday party, Cole deliberately spilled juice on my shirt, laughing loudly and saying, "Oh, sorry, Wesley. I forgot you were wearing nice clothes today." Everyone burst into laughter while I just stood there, clenching my fists, trying not to let my anger explode. But it was precisely those moments that forged me. I knew I couldn't rely on pity or kindness from anyone in this family except grandfather. Virgil was the only one who believed in me. He didn't just teach me about business, he taught me about being a person. I remember one afternoon when I was 12 years old, he took me to a large warehouse on the outskirts of Atlanta. He pointed to the workers unloading goods and said, "Wesley, look at them. They are the heart of this conglomerate. If you want to lead, you must understand the value of every person, every smallest task." I nodded, committing every word he said to memory. Those trips with grandfather were the light of my childhood, but they were also the source of the family's envy. Gerald and Albert grew increasingly irritated seeing grandfather favor me. They began forbidding me from seeing him, claiming I was a bother or not qualified enough. Once I was locked in my room all day just for sneaking out to meet grandfather at the office. I sat in the dark room hearing my adoptive mother Helen sigh outside the door. "Wesley, you have to know your place." But I didn't yield. I secretly wrote letters to grandfather, hiding them in books I knew he would read. And each time I received a reply from him with his firm but loving handwriting, I felt like I could overcome anything. The relationship between me and my adoptive family grew increasingly tense. Gerald and Helen no longer bothered to hide their indifference. They treated me like a stranger, an unnecessary item in their lavish home. Cole became even more cruel, always finding ways to humiliate me, but it was that very harshness that made me grow up. The determination to prove myself worthy of the Stone family followed me through my years of study, until I stepped out of the university gates, a business degree in hand, my heart brimming with a desire to contribute to Heritage Stone International, the empire my grandfather had built from nothing. I thought it would be the start of my dream, but reality delivered a cold slap, a harsh lesson about the cruelty of those who called themselves family. When I returned to Atlanta, Heritage Stone was no longer the same. My grandfather, once the soul of the conglomerate, had retired. He handed over the reins to my adoptive father, Gerald, hoping he would uphold the legacy. But Gerald was no Virgil Stone. He ran the company with arrogance and authoritarianism, turning the values my grandfather cherished, like dedication to customers and respect for employees, into dry numbers on financial reports. I walked into Heritage Stone's headquarters with eagerness, ready to contribute, but from the very first day I realized I was not welcome. Gerald made no effort to hide his irritation at my presence. "Wesley, where do you think you are? This isn't your playground," he said coldly during the first meeting I was allowed to attend. I sat at the far end of the table, feeling the scrutinizing gazes of senior managers. Gerald and Uncle Albert, the chief financial officer, quickly sidelined me from any significant decisions. They assigned me trivial tasks, like checking meeting minutes or scheduling appointments, as if I were a mere intern, not the one my grandfather had mentored from childhood. Cole, my younger brother, was even worse. With his smirking smile and arrogant attitude, he never missed a chance to mock me in front of others. Once, in a packed meeting room, as I tried to propose an idea for improving the distribution process, Cole interrupted me mid-sentence. "Wesley, do you think you're smarter than everyone here? A foster kid trying to lecture us?" The room erupted in laughter, though I noticed a few averted their eyes as if sensing the unfairness. I gripped my pen tightly, suppressing my anger, but inside a fire was burning. I didn't stop trying. I spent countless nights studying reports, researching markets, and developing ideas I believed could help Heritage Stone grow. Once I proposed expanding the supermarket chain into suburban areas, regions with rising demand for high-quality food that remained untapped. I prepared a detailed plan, complete with data and profit projections, hoping it would change how Gerald and Albert viewed me. But when I presented it at the board meeting, Gerald didn't even bother to read the document. He waved it off with a sneer. "Wesley, you think a few numbers will impress us? You should learn your place." Albert nodded in agreement while Cole laughed loudly as if my idea were a joke. I stood there, in the luxurious meeting room with its wood-paneled walls and windows overlooking the city, feeling suffocated. I wanted to shout, to say that I had spent months researching, that I believed in this plan because of the lessons my grandfather taught me. But I knew that no matter what I said, they wouldn't listen. To them, I wasn't Wesley Stone, a man with dreams and ambitions, but just the adopted kid who would never be worthy. The months that followed were a series of rejections. I was excluded from major projects, given meaningless tasks, and mocked whenever I tried to speak up. Once I overheard a conversation between Gerald and Albert in the break room. "Does that kid think he can change anything?" Albert said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Just let him do the grunt work and he'll get tired and leave." Gerald laughed. "Exactly. He'll never be part of this legacy." I stood behind the door, my heart constricting, but I told myself I couldn't give up. Not for them, but for my grandfather, the one who believed in me. But my patience had its limits. Each passing day made it clearer that staying here would keep me suppressed forever. I couldn't wait for recognition from people who never wanted to see me succeed. I began to think about leaving, but the thought terrified me. Heritage Stone was everything I had ever dreamed of, the legacy my grandfather built, the place where I felt I belonged. Leaving meant abandoning everything I had hoped for, but staying felt like digging a deeper hole for myself. One night, sitting alone in my small apartment looking out the window at Atlanta's glittering skyline, I recalled my grandfather's words. "If they don't give you a chance, make your own." Those words were a beacon in the darkness. I realized I couldn't keep waiting for Gerald, Albert, or Cole to change. I had to stand up and forge my own path. And so, with a heart full of determination but heavy with pain, I made the boldest decision of my life: to leave Heritage Stone International. The day I announced my decision, Gerald and Albert weren't surprised. They looked at me as if they had long expected it. "You think you can survive out there, Wesley?" Gerald said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Without Heritage Stone, you're nothing." Albert laughed. "Starving on the streets is the price of arrogance, kid." Cole, as usual, didn't miss the chance to taunt. "Good luck, big brother. Hope you find a nice street corner to beg on." Their words stung, but they didn't deter me. I was too accustomed to their cruelty. I packed a few essentials, left the office with just a small briefcase and a heart full of resolve. But before I left, I received an unexpected call. It was my grandfather. He had heard the news from an old friend in the company. His voice, though weaker than before, was still deep and steady. "Wesley, you're a strong man. I know you'll do great things. Remember my words. A true leader is never afraid to start from nothing." Those words were the final spark I needed. I left Heritage Stone not because I had failed, but because I knew the road ahead, however difficult, would be mine to walk. I would build something, not to please Gerald, Albert, or Cole, but to prove I was worthy of my grandfather's faith. As I stepped out of Heritage Stone's towering building, I looked back one last time, my heart aching yet brimming with hope. The twinkling lights from the upper floors reminded me of the legacy my grandfather left behind. But I also understood that his legacy wasn't just buildings or numbers on reports. It was the unyielding spirit, the perseverance he had instilled in me. I gripped my small briefcase tightly, walking into the chilly Atlanta evening, telling myself this wasn't the end, but a new beginning. My entrepreneurial journey began with little. Just some savings from my years at Heritage Stone, a few unfinished ideas, and an unwavering belief that I could achieve something great. I reached out to 2 college friends, Ethan and Maya, who had once stayed up all night with me to complete group projects. They weren't wealthy or well-connected, but they shared the same burning passion as I did. We sat in a small coffee shop surrounded by scattered papers and scribbled sketches to start a dream. A startup in food distribution, leveraging cutting-edge technology to optimize supply chains. We called it Fresh Path, a simple name but one that carried our hope for a fresh, untainted path, free from the scheming of the Stone family. The early days were a nightmare. We rented a tiny office on the outskirts of Atlanta, where the smell of old paint and the screeching air conditioner gave me headaches every night. With limited capital, virtually no clients, and giant competitors looming over us, I remember mornings waking up at my desk, a cold coffee cup beside me and fear creeping into my heart. Did I make a mistake leaving Heritage Stone? But every time doubt arose, I thought of my grandfather, of those field trips long ago when he pointed to shelves and said, "Wesley, do better, not just for yourself, but for those who believe in you." And so I dove back into work day and night without pause. We started by building a technology platform to optimize food distribution, a system that used data to predict demand, minimize waste, and ensure products reached customers fresh. I applied every lesson from my grandfather, focusing on the smallest details, from how goods were arranged to how we communicated with partners. But reality wasn't like those warm conversations with him. The market was ruthless, and we faced constant rejections. Once Ethan and I drove 3 hours to meet a potential supplier, only for them to cancel at the last minute without explanation. Maya, with her incredible patience, was often the one pulling Ethan and me out of moments of despair, reminding us that great things take time. But the greatest challenge didn't come from the market, it came from my adoptive family. One day, as we were close to securing a major contract with a regional supermarket chain, the partner abruptly backed out. I still remember that call, the manager's voice cold and curt over the phone. "Sorry, Wesley, but we can't move forward. Someone made a better offer." I was stunned, unable to comprehend what had happened, until Ethan discovered that Gerald and Albert had quietly contacted the partner, using Heritage Stone's influence to sabotage our deal. They didn't just want me to fail. They wanted to crush me. That blow nearly broke me. I sat in our tiny office, staring at the red numbers on the spreadsheet, feeling like all my efforts were slipping away. Maya walked in, placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Wesley, they're doing this because they're scared of you. If you give up now, they win." Her words were like a wake-up slap. I remembered the days locked in my room for sneaking out to see my grandfather, the times I was mocked for being the adopted kid. I couldn't let them win. Never. I threw myself into work with renewed energy. We refined our platform, sought out smaller partners willing to trust a fledgling startup, and I learned to negotiate, persuade, and hold fast to my belief even when everything seemed against me. My grandfather's lessons about perseverance and putting customers first became my guiding star. I started attending trade shows, standing for hours to pitch FreshPath to people who barely glanced at our flyers. Once, a local food supplier laughed out loud when I presented our idea. "You think you can compete with giants like Heritage Stone?" I smiled and replied, "I don't need to compete with them. I just need to do better." And then, after 2 years of struggle, a glimmer of light emerged. A small supermarket chain in the southeast U.S. agreed to sign a contract with us. It was FreshPath's first major deal, a milestone we celebrated with cheap beers in our cramped office. I still remember that moment. When we received the contract confirmation email, Ethan shouted, Maya hugged me tightly, and I just sat there, staring at the screen, tears silently streaming down my face. It wasn't just a contract. It was proof that I could do it, that I didn't need the Stone name to succeed. Word about FreshPath began to spread. A small article in a local newspaper called me the disowned heir building his own empire. From there, journalists took notice. They called, asking about my journey leaving Heritage Stone, about how I built FreshPath from nothing. I didn't want to boast, but I didn't hide the truth either. I spoke about the years of being sidelined, the times my adoptive family mocked me, and the faith my grandfather had placed in me. Those stories, far from weakening me, turned me into a symbol, a young man daring to stand up against giants. The news didn't take long to reach Gerald, Albert, and Cole. I heard Gerald slammed his desk in a rage when he read the article about me, while Albert called partners to try to smear FreshPath's reputation. Cole, as usual, mocked me on social media, posting sarcastic comments. "Congrats to Big Bro for landing a tiny deal. Don't dream too big." But I knew, behind their taunts, there was fear. They were starting to realize I was no longer the boy they could easily bully. If I kept succeeding, Cole's position as the legitimate heir would falter, and Gerald and Albert's influence in Heritage Stone would no longer be as secure. Those days were a mix of pride and unease. I knew I was on the right path, but I could also feel the shadow of my family looming over me. They wouldn't leave me in peace. But I wasn't afraid. I had learned that in this world nothing comes easily, and if I wanted to protect my dream, I had to be ready to fight. FreshPath, my startup, was slowly finding its footing, but I never anticipated that the greatest challenge would come not from the market or competitors, but from the very people who called themselves family, and from a loss I was never prepared to face. One rainy afternoon in Atlanta, as I sat in FreshPath's small office reviewing revenue reports, my phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number, but the voice on the other end was achingly familiar. Mr. James, a former manager at Heritage Stone who had worked under my grandfather. "Wesley," he said, his voice trembling. "I don't know how to say this, but Virgil, he's very weak. He's been in the hospital for weeks." I felt the blood drain from my body. My grandfather, the man strong as a mountain who had taught me everything I knew, was lying in a hospital bed, and no one in the family had told me. I asked Mr. James, trying to keep my voice steady. Why didn't I know? Who's with him? He sighed, his voice heavy with helplessness. Gerald and Albert kept it quiet. They didn't want you to know. I only found out because a friend at the hospital told me. His words hit me like a punch to the chest. I hung up, stood, and without a second thought, rushed out of the office, running through the rain to get to the hospital. I had to see my grandfather. I had to know he was okay. Emory Hospital in Atlanta was a cold, white building with endless corridors and the sharp smell of antiseptic. I stood outside the ICU where my grandfather lay, but before I could step inside, Gerald and Albert appeared, blocking my way at the door. Gerald, in his impeccable suit and with eyes like ice, said, "What are you doing here, Wesley? My father needs rest, not more burdens from someone outside our bloodline." His words cut like a knife, but I tried to stay calm, my voice trembling. "He's my grandfather. I have a right to see him." Albert smirked, stepping closer, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "A right? You think you have any rights here? You're nothing, Wesley." I wanted to push past them, to scream that my grandfather was the only one who truly loved me, but security guards appeared, barring the door at Gerald's command. I was forced outside, standing in the rain, my shirt soaked, my heart shattered. But the most painful moment came when Cole appeared, standing under the hospital's awning, looking at me with a mocking grin. "Why are you crying, big brother? Did you think Grandpa would call out for you in his final moments? Wake up, you're not family." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms until they bled, but I didn't respond. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. The days that followed were a nightmare. I tried every way to visit my grandfather. I called the hospital, sent gifts, wrote letters, even asked nurses I knew to pass on messages, but most were intercepted by the family. Gerald and Albert controlled everything from the visitor list to updates about his condition. I felt powerless, as if I were losing my grandfather a second time, not to illness, but to the cruelty of those around him. Each night I sat in my small apartment looking out at Atlanta's skyline, wondering if my grandfather knew I was trying to reach him, that I had never given up on him. But then, a flicker of hope emerged. An elderly nurse, Martha, who had worked at the hospital since my grandfather's days of routine checkups, secretly contacted me. "Wesley," she whispered over the phone, "I know you're the one Virgil loved most. I'll help you." That day I wrote a short letter, just a few lines, pouring out my heart. "Grandpa, I'm still here. I'll never give up on what you taught me. I love you." I gave the letter to Martha, praying it would reach him. A few days later, Martha called again. "Come, Wesley. I have something for you." I raced to the hospital, my heart pounding. Martha pulled me into a quiet corner and handed me a small, carefully folded piece of paper. The handwriting on it was shaky, weak, but I recognized it instantly as my grandfather's. "Wesley, you are my pride. Don't let them break you. Keep fighting. I pressed the note to my chest, tears streaming down my face. It was the first time in weeks I felt my grandfather was still there, still believing in me, despite being surrounded by the hospital's walls and my family's cruelty. That note became my sole source of strength. I kept it in my wallet, carrying it like a talisman, a reminder that I couldn't give up. But the pain didn't fade. Every time I thought of my grandfather lying there alone in his hospital room with me unable to be by his side, it felt like a chasm opened in my chest. I kept working on Fresh Path, but my mind was always at the hospital, with the man who gave me a reason to fight. Meanwhile, Gerald, Albert, and Cole acted as if I didn't exist. They held press conferences, appeared on TV to talk about the Stone family legacy, but never once mentioned me. Cole even posted on social media, sharing a photo of himself by my grandfather's bedside with the caption, "With Grandpa in his final days, family is everything." I read it late one night and anger surged through me like wildfire. But I knew that letting that anger control me would mean defeat. I had to stay strong, not just for myself but for my grandfather. I kept trying, sending messages through Martha, hoping they'd reach him. But I knew time was running out. Each passing day made me feel the fragility of everything. I feared I'd never get to say goodbye, never get to thank my grandfather for all he'd done for me. And I feared that in his final moments he might think I had abandoned him. But I never expected that. Even in his weakest days, my grandfather was preparing something, a final card, a last gift for me. That trembling note wasn't just encouragement. It was a promise that he would never let me fight alone. Then one day, the storm hit. I was at the Fresh Path office, buried in a mess of paperwork and urgent calls when my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen, but I answered, thinking it might be a supplier or a business partner. The voice on the other end stopped my heart cold. It was Harold, my grandfather's private attorney, whom I'd only met a few times on significant occasions. His voice was low, deliberate, and carried a chilling edge. "Wesley, we need to meet. Right now. It's about Virgil." I gripped the phone tightly, my voice trembling as I tried to stay calm. "What's wrong with Grandpa? Is he okay?" But Harold's response was heavy. "Come to my office. I'll explain." A cold premonition ran down my spine as if someone had poured ice into my veins. I knew, though I didn't want to admit it, that the worst had happened. I rushed out of the office, not bothering to grab my coat or say a word to Ethan or Maya. I drove through the streets of Atlanta, my mind a whirlwind, my heart pounding as if it might burst. The light rain outside mirrored the unease within me, each drop hitting the windshield like a hammer to my chest. My grandfather, the man strong as a mountain who taught me to stand tall against the world, couldn't leave me. He couldn't. I told myself he was probably just frail, that I still had time to be by his side, to hold his hand and tell him I'd never forgotten his lessons. But deep down, a small cold voice whispered that I was already too late. When I pushed open the door to Harold's office, a small but elegant room in downtown Atlanta, his gaze made me falter. He sat behind his desk, his silver hair disheveled across his forehead, his eyes sad but resolute. Before I could even sit down, he spoke, his voice cutting like a knife. "Wesley, Virgil passed away this morning." The world around me collapsed. The floor beneath me seemed to dissolve, and I felt myself falling into a bottomless void. I wanted to scream, to deny it, to say Harold was mistaken, that my grandfather couldn't leave me like this. But I just stood there, my legs trembling, then collapsed into a chair, my hands covering my face, trying to hold back the tidal wave of pain tearing through my chest. My grandfather, my only anchor, the one who saw me when the world turned its back, who believed in me when I doubted myself, was gone. I felt as if a part of me had died with him, as if the fire he'd ignited in me was flickering, about to go out. Memories flooded back, sharp as blades. Our field trips, his resonant voice teaching me about honor, his proud gaze when I presented my clumsy ideas at 12 years old. I had promised him I'd make him proud, but now I had no chance to say thank you, to say I loved him. I looked up, my voice breaking. Why didn't anyone tell me? Harold sighed, his eyes full of sympathy but also helplessness. Gerald and Albert kept it quiet, Wesley. They didn't want you to know. I only found out because a friend at the hospital informed me. His words struck like lightning, turning my grief into a blaze of anger. Gerald, Albert, and Cole. They hadn't just robbed me of the chance to be with my grandfather in his final days. They'd taken away my right to know he was gone. I slammed my fist on the desk, my voice shaking with rage. They had no right. Grandpa was the only one who truly loved me, and they dared to keep me from him? Harold sat there, his gaze empathetic, quietly sliding a glass of water toward me and waiting patiently for me to calm down. He passed peacefully, he said, but I knew it was just a comforting phrase. But he left something for you, Wesley. Something very important. I looked up, my eyes blurred with tears. Harold pulled a thick, sealed envelope and a handwritten letter from his desk drawer. This is Virgil's will, he said, and this is a letter he wrote specifically for you. My hands trembled as I took the envelope, feeling as if I were touching a piece of my grandfather. But when I opened the will, what I read left me in disbelief. In the will written years ago when my grandfather was still sharp, he left the entirety of his controlling shares in Heritage Stone International, along with his most valuable real estate and personal assets to me, Wesley Stone, the adopted son the family always scorned. He wrote clearly in sharp legal language that I was the only one he trusted to carry on his legacy. Gerald, Albert, and Cole received nothing more as they had already been given their shares earlier and, in his words, had not proven themselves worthy. I read it over and over, my heart pounding, unable to believe that my grandfather had quietly prepared all this, even when I was pushed to the margins of the family. Then I opened the handwritten letter. His familiar script, though frailer than the note from the hospital, still carried his steadfast tone. Wesley, you're the only one who understands my life's work. I didn't choose you because you're adopted, but because you have the heart and will of a true leader. Don't be afraid. Take what I've left you and protect our legacy. I believe in you. I clutched the letter to my chest, tears falling onto the paper, but this time not from pain, but from a fierce emotion. As if my grandfather were standing right there, placing his hand on my shoulder, giving me the strength to face the world. Meanwhile, Gerald, Albert, and Cole were completely unaware of the will. They believed my grandfather had died without a legal will, and by law his assets would be split equally among his direct descendants. Harold told me they had organized a lavish funeral, like a display of the Stone family's power, but deliberately didn't inform me. Cole even posted on social media about the family's profound loss, as if I didn't exist. Gerald and Albert had already begun discussing how to divide the shares, laughing gleefully, certain I'd be left with nothing. They didn't know that my grandfather had played his final card, one that would upend everything. I left Harold's office, clutching the will and the letter, feeling as if I were carrying a ticking time bomb. I knew the moment the will was revealed would be a battle. Gerald, Albert, and Cole wouldn't accept it easily. They'd scream, they'd sue, they'd do anything to reclaim what they thought was theirs. But I wasn't afraid. I was ready. I would walk into the public reading of the will, where the whole family would gather, and I would lay my grandfather's card on the table, in front of everyone. I imagined Gerald's face when he realized he'd underestimated me, pictured Cole's panicked eyes when he understood that the adopted kid had surpassed him. But above all, I imagined my grandfather somewhere smiling. I didn't get to attend my grandfather's funeral. I didn't get to say goodbye. But I knew he didn't need those rituals. He had given me a greater gift, a chance to prove I was worthy not just of the Stone name, but of everything he believed in. And when the day of the will's reading arrived, I would walk into that room not as an outcast, but as the true heir, the one Virgil Stone had chosen. That morning, the Atlanta sky was cloaked in gray clouds, as if the entire city were holding its breath for a fateful moment. I stood before the mirror in my small apartment, adjusting the dark green tie, my grandfather's favorite color from our field trips years ago. I didn't choose a flashy suit like the ones Gerald or Cole wore to flaunt their status. My outfit was simple, but to me it carried the weight of sincerity, of the lessons my grandfather had instilled in me. In my jacket pocket, I kept his letter, its trembling script a reminder that he was still here, if only in my mind and heart. The law firm's office was on a high floor of a gleaming glass building with dark wood-paneled walls and large windows overlooking Atlanta's skyline. When I pushed open the door to the meeting room, the air inside was heavy as lead. Gerald sat at the head of the table, his expensive gray suit fitting his tall frame perfectly, his smug eyes radiating confidence, as if he already held everything in his grasp. Albert, seated beside him, flipped through a stack of documents, a haughty smirk on his lips. Cole, as usual, lounged back in his chair, phone in hand, scrolling with a careless air, as if the reading of the will was just a formality to hand him what he believed was rightfully his. Other relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, sat scattered around the table, whispering to one another, their eyes glinting with anticipation. They all believed my grandfather's estate would be divided equally under the law, and I, the adopted kid, would leave empty-handed. As I entered, the room fell silent for a brief moment. Then Gerald spoke, his voice cold as ice. "What are you doing here, Wesley? This is family business." Albert sneered, adding, "Yeah, kid. You should go back to your tiny startup." Cole, never missing a chance, looked up from his phone with a mocking grin. "Or what, you here to beg for some pocket change to keep your pipe dream alive?" Laughter erupted from a few relatives, a chorus of contempt. But I didn't respond. I pulled out a chair, sat at the end of the table, and placed my small briefcase on my lap. Inside was the will, my grandfather's final card, and I knew that when it was played, every smile in this room would vanish. The lead attorney, Mr. Grayson, an older man with silver hair and gold-rimmed glasses, entered the room. He carried a thick folder, his expression calm but tinged with tension. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice deep and clear. "We are gathered today to read the will of Mr. Virgil Stone, founder of Heritage Stone International. I will begin with the necessary legal formalities." Grayson started with the standard provisions: small bequests to longtime employees, a charitable fund in my grandfather's name, and a few gifts to close friends. The room listened, but I could sense their impatience. They were waiting for the main event, the controlling shares of Heritage Stone, the real estate, and the most valuable assets. Gerald and Albert exchanged glances as if they'd already calculated how to divvy it up. Cole yawned, but I knew it was an act. I sat still, my hands resting on the briefcase, my heart pounding. Then the moment arrived. Grayson paused, adjusted his glasses, and said, "Before we proceed, I must inform you that no official will was filed with this office. By law, Mr. Virgil's estate would be divided equally among his direct descendants." Gerald flashed a triumphant smile. Albert nodded in satisfaction, and Cole chuckled, shooting me a smug look. But I knew it was time to play my card. I stood slowly, my voice calm but firm. "Mr. Grayson, I think you need to see this before you conclude." All eyes turned to me. Gerald frowned, Albert smirked, and Cole glared as if he wanted to devour me. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the will Harold had given me, a neatly sealed set of papers with clear notarization. I placed it on the table, the sound of paper meeting wood ringing like a hammer in the silent room. "This is my grandfather's will," I said, looking straight into Gerald's eyes. "It was drafted years ago when he was of sound mind, and it is fully legally binding." The room erupted. Gerald slammed the table, leaping to his feet. "What are you talking about? This is a scam!" Albert shouted. "No way Dad would do something that crazy!" Cole lunged forward, snatching the will from Grayson's hands, but the attorney raised a hand, his voice stern. "Everyone calm down. I need to review this document." He put on his glasses and read each line, each word, as the air in the room grew suffocating. After a few tense minutes, Grayson looked up and nodded. "This is a legally valid will bearing Mr. Virgil Stone's signature with proper notarization and witnesses." Its legal standing is undeniable." He began reading aloud, his voice resounding like a verdict. "The entirety of the controlling shares in Heritage Stone International, along with the most valuable real estate and personal assets, is bequeathed to Wesley Stone. Gerald Stone, Albert Stone, and Cole Stone shall receive no additional assets, as they were previously allocated their shares. If they wish to be considered for further inheritance, they must prove their competence and worthiness, with Wesley Stone having full authority to evaluate and decide." The room fell deathly silent. Then, like a volcano erupting, Gerald roared, "This is impossible. That kid isn't even Dad's real blood." Albert pointed at me, his face flushed. "You forged this, Wesley. You won't get away with it." Cole cursed, throwing his phone onto the table. "You're a fraud. You don't deserve this." The other relatives gaped, whispering among themselves, their eyes flickering between shock and disbelief. But I stood there, silent, my gaze calm as a still lake. I didn't need to argue. The truth had spoken, and it echoed louder than any protest. Grayson continued, "Additionally, there is a personal letter from Mr. Virgil to Wesley." He handed me a small envelope, and I opened it in front of everyone. My grandfather's words, though brief, surged through me like a wave of strength. "Wesley, you are my true legacy. Lead Heritage Stone as I taught you, with honor and heart." I folded the letter, feeling as if my grandfather were right there, witnessing it all. Gerald, Albert, and Cole continued to shout, threatening lawsuits and demanding a review of the will's legality. But Grayson shook his head. "Everything is clear. This will is legally binding." They glared at me, their eyes burning with hatred, but I wasn't afraid. I knew this moment wasn't just my victory. It was my grandfather's, the man who saw me when no one else would. As I left the room, I felt their eyes boring into my back, but I didn't look back. I stepped outside, camera flashes from the press lighting up the air, and I knew this news would soon spread across Atlanta. But the spotlight or recognition wasn't what mattered most to me. It was the knowledge that I hadn't let my grandfather down. I had kept my promise to him, and now I would take his legacy, not just to protect it, but to make it shine brighter than ever. The news of the will spread like wildfire. Within hours of the reading, major headlines blared. Wesley Stone, abandoned adopted son, becomes heir to the Heritage Stone International empire. Articles recounted my story, from a boy scorned by his family to the one holding the controlling shares of one of America's largest corporations. Some praised my grandfather's decision as visionary, calling me a new breeze for Heritage Stone. Others were skeptical, questioning whether a young man like me, with experience primarily from a small startup, could lead such an empire. I didn't care about the whispers. I knew that to prove my worth, I needed action, not words. But the spotlight didn't shine only on me. Gerald, Albert, and Cole became the center of humiliation. Photos of them leaving the law firm, faces pale and eyes burning with anger, flooded social media. A post on X went viral, captioned, "Stone family humiliated as Virgil Stone's will chooses adopted son." Hundreds of comments poured in, ranging from sympathy for me to mockery of Gerald and Albert's arrogance. Cole, always eager to flaunt his life online, was uncharacteristically silent, but I knew he was seething. This public disgrace wasn't just a personal blow. It shook their credibility with shareholders and partners. Within the family, the rift grew starkly evident. Gerald and Albert faced tough questions from major shareholders. If Virgil Stone didn't trust you, why should we? Partners who had long been wary of Gerald's authoritarian style began shifting their attention, reaching out to me in search of a younger, more transparent leader. I received calls from regional directors who had worked under my grandfather, saying they looked forward to me bringing Heritage Stone back to its golden era. But I knew that before I could do that, I'd have to face another battle within the boardroom itself. The day I entered Heritage Stone's headquarters as the controlling shareholder, I felt like I was stepping into an arena. The towering glass and steel building where I'd once been sidelined was now the stage where I'd claim my place. The board meeting was held in the main conference room with a long walnut table and portraits of my grandfather lining the walls. As I walked in, Gerald, still the CEO, sat at the head of the table, his eyes icy. Albert, the CFO, sat beside him, clutching a coffee mug as if to restrain his anger. Cole, though holding no official role on the board, was present, his gaze venomous, as if he wanted to devour me. The other members, longtime shareholders and executives, looked at me with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. I sat down, placing a thick folder of documents in front of me, reports I'd prepared over sleepless nights, drawing on my experience at Freshpath and my grandfather's lessons. Gerald opened the meeting, his voice low but challenging. "Wesley, you may be the controlling shareholder, but you lack experience. You don't understand the inner workings of Heritage Stone. You think you can just sit here and give orders?" Albert chimed in. "Exactly. We've run this company for decades. You're just a kid with a few small-time contracts." Cole couldn't hold back, leaping to his feet. "You're trying to ruin this family, Wesley. You don't belong here." I stayed silent, letting them vent their anger. Then I stood, my voice calm but sharp. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not here to argue about where I belong. I'm here because Virgil Stone trusted me, and I have a responsibility to protect his legacy." I opened the folder, presenting evidence of financial mismanagement under Gerald's leadership, from opaque expenditures to shady contracts with favored suppliers. I highlighted the company's market share decline over the past 3 years, the management scandals Gerald and Albert had tried to cover up, and the expansion opportunities they'd ignored, ones I'd proposed when I still worked here. The room fell silent. Some board members, loyal to Gerald, avoided my gaze, but I could see them wavering. I pressed on. "I propose that the board vote to remove Gerald Stone as CEO and Albert Stone as CFO simultaneously. I nominate myself as CEO to lead Heritage Stone in line with Virgil's vision." Gerald let out a forced laugh. "You're delusional, Wesley. You think the board will choose an inexperienced kid like you?" But I didn't respond. I looked into the eyes of each board member, letting them see I wasn't here for a power game. I was here to save the legacy. The vote was held in a suffocatingly tense atmosphere. Gerald and Albert lobbied furiously, making calls, sending messages, trying to sway their loyal allies. Cole hurled personal attacks, calling me a family traitor. But the pressure from my position as controlling shareholder, combined with quiet support from other shareholders, those fed up with Gerald's authoritarian style, shifted the balance. When the results were announced, my heart felt like it stopped. The majority voted in my favor. Gerald and Albert were officially removed from their executive roles. Cole, with no voice on the board, sat there, his face pale, eyes burning with hatred. As the meeting ended, I stepped out of the room, camera flashes from the press lighting up again. I didn't gloat or smile triumphantly. I only felt a profound relief, as if my grandfather were standing somewhere, nodding in approval. Gerald, Albert, and Cole remained in the boardroom, their faces like stone statues, eyes filled with humiliation and resentment. I knew they wouldn't stop. They'd seek revenge, plot to reclaim what they'd lost. But I wasn't afraid. I had survived years of being scorned and sidelined, and now I stood here not just as the heir, but as the leader, exactly as my grandfather had envisioned. I walked out of the building, the Atlanta sunlight warming my face, and I felt a new fire ignite within me. A fire of responsibility and ambition to restore Heritage Stone to its golden era. The first days as CEO were nothing like I'd imagined. I wasn't sitting in a luxurious office, issuing orders and signing documents. Instead, I dove headfirst into the chaos left behind by Gerald and Albert. Financial reports were riddled with holes, contracts with suppliers were shady, and employee morale was at its lowest in the company's history. I remember my first morning in the CEO's office, looking out the window at the sprawling Atlanta skyline, wondering if I had the strength to revive this empire. But then I opened the desk drawer, the one my grandfather once used, and found an old notebook. Inside were his handwritten notes outlining his business principles. Customers are the heart. Employees are the soul. Honor is the foundation. I smiled, feeling as if my grandfather were reminding me where to start. I knew that to transform Heritage Stone, I had to act swiftly and decisively. In my first board meeting, I announced 3 major priorities. First, financial transparency. I hired an independent auditing firm to review every expenditure from the past 5 years. I wanted every number disclosed, not just to shareholders, but to employees, to rebuild the trust lost under Gerald's tenure. Second, restructuring. I decided to close unprofitable branches, redirecting resources to core markets and high-growth areas like the suburban regions I'd proposed years ago. Third, technology investment. I brought my experience from FreshPath to Heritage Stone, implementing smart distribution solutions using AI and big data to optimize the supply chain. These were ideas Gerald had once laughed off, but now they were the key to moving the company forward. My decisions weren't met with enthusiasm. Some board members, accustomed to Gerald's authoritarian style, were skeptical. "You're too young, Wesley," one said. "You think you can do what Gerald couldn't?" I didn't argue. I simply replied, "Give me 1 year. If I fail, you can replace me." But deep down, I knew I couldn't fail. Not for myself, but for my grandfather. For the employees who'd been with Heritage Stone for decades. And for the legacy I now held. My leadership style was worlds apart from Gerald and Albert's. They thrived on pomp, ruling from above, issuing orders without listening. I chose my grandfather's approach, approachable, transparent, and people first. I started going on field visits just as he had done with me. I visited supermarkets, warehouses, and distribution centers, talking to employees, listening to their challenges. Once, a longtime employee, Ruth, pulled me aside and said, "You know, Wesley, you remind me of Virgil. He used to stand right here asking about us like we were family." Her words brought a sting to my eyes. I knew I was on the right path. But not everything went smoothly. Gerald, Albert, and Cole, though demoted, didn't disappear as I'd hoped. They began rallying disgruntled shareholders, secretly sending emails and spreading rumors that I lacked experience and would ruin Heritage Stone. I learned that Albert had tried to meet privately with a major partner, urging them to pull their contract by claiming Wesley isn't capable. I confronted him in a closed-door meeting, my voice calm but sharp. "If you want to fight, do it openly. Don't skulk behind my back." Albert's face paled and he had no response. But I knew they wouldn't stop. Still, results began to show. After 6 months, the audit revealed that opaque expenditures had been eliminated, saving the company millions. Unprofitable branches were closed and resources were redirected to new markets, where revenue growth exceeded expectations. The smart distribution system I implemented reduced waste and boosted delivery efficiency by 20%. Heritage Stone's stock, which had plummeted under Gerald, began to stabilize. The press, once skeptical of me, shifted to praise. "Young CEO revives Stone Empire." An article in the Atlanta Business Chronicle wrote, "Wesley Stone isn't just inheriting a legacy, he's rewriting it." Longtime employees who had worked under my grandfather began to look at me differently. One afternoon, while inspecting a warehouse in the suburbs, Henry, a warehouse manager with over 30 years of service, shook my hand and said, "You know, Wesley, we finally have a leader worth following again. Virgil must be proud." I smiled, but inside a wave of emotion surged. One evening, as the red glow of sunset bathed the warehouse shelves, I called Ethan and Maya to my office. They walked in, still with the same unassuming passion from our sleepless nights at FreshPath's tiny office. I looked at them, the people who hadn't abandoned me in my darkest days, and said, "Ethan, Maya, I want you to run FreshPath, not just as a subsidiary, but as an integral part of Heritage Stone. Its technology and spirit will be the heart of our innovation." Maya's eyes lit up. while Ethan shook his head, laughing. "Wesley, you don't need to do this. We just want to support you." But I took their hands, my voice firm. "This isn't about repaying you. It's because you deserve it, and because I believe my grandfather's legacy will only shine if we protect it together." I decided to integrate FreshPath into Heritage Stone, not letting it fade, but using it as a new flame to light the path forward. To me, preserving my grandfather's legacy wasn't just about protecting it. It was about honoring the people who stood by me, who turned dreams into reality. But in the shadows, darkness still lurked. Gerald and Albert began quietly preparing a lawsuit, claiming my grandfather's will was unreasonable and demanding a court review. Cole, though powerless in the company, posted venomous rants on social media calling me a legacy thief. I knew they were waiting for me to slip, biding their time to turn the tables. But I wasn't afraid. I was ready to face any scheme they might concoct. Each night, as I sit in the top floor office of Heritage Stone, I look down at Atlanta, where supermarkets and distribution centers bearing the Stone name hum with activity. I take out my grandfather's letter and read it again, feeling as if he's here, reminding me that a legacy isn't just about money or power. It's about honor, responsibility, and the hearts of those who trust me. I know the journey ahead is long and the challenges will not be easy, but I'm ready. With the fire my grandfather kindled in me, I will take Heritage Stone further, not just to preserve his legacy, but to make it shine, just as he dreamed. In the quiet space under the soft glow of the desk lamp, I think of myself, the boy once called the spare, pushed to the margins of the family that bore my name. Today I stand as the head of Heritage Stone International, having walked paths I never dared imagine, even in my dreams. Every step was a battle, against the contempt of Gerald, Albert, and Cole, against the doubts of shareholders, and against my own moments of weakness. But each time I wanted to give up, I remembered my grandfather, the man with sharp eyes and a resonant voice who saw me when no one else would. My journey isn't just about reclaiming an inheritance or defeating those who underestimated me. It's about discovering my own worth, about learning to stand firm amidst storms. When I left Heritage Stone to start FreshPath, I thought I was abandoning my grandfather's legacy. But now I understand that decision brought me back to it in a way I never expected. The years struggling with the startup, the sleepless nights keeping FreshPath alive, and the moments facing betrayal from my adoptive family forged me into the person my grandfather always believed I could be. Now at 32, I'm no longer the trembling boy standing outside my grandfather's office, shyly handing him a scribbled plan. I'm Wesley Stone, CEO of Heritage Stone International, the one who steered the company through a crisis, restored the trust of shareholders and employees, and laid the foundation for a new future. But I'm not complacent. I know every success today is built on the lessons my grandfather taught me, about discipline, honor, and putting people first. Every decision I make, from financial transparency to investing in technology, bears his mark, as if he's still guiding me from afar. Gerald, Albert, and Cole haven't given up. I've heard they're preparing a new lawsuit claiming my grandfather was not of sound mind when he wrote the will. But I'm not worried. My lawyers, led by Harold, are ready. Moreover, the support from shareholders and employees gives me confidence that, whatever they scheme, I'll overcome it. Cole still posts occasional venomous rants on social media, but they no longer carry the weight they once did. The press now calls me the worthy heir, and each time I read those words, I feel my grandfather smiling somewhere. But my grandfather's true legacy isn't in the headlines or the numbers on financial reports. It's in the small moments I witness every day, when a warehouse worker smiles in gratitude because I listen to their ideas, when a customer sends a letter praising our product quality, or when I stand in a Stone-branded supermarket looking at shelves stocked full, remembering field trips with my grandfather. Those are the moments that make me feel I'm living up to his expectations. If I could send a message to anyone listening to this story, it would be this. There will be times in life when you're belittled, pushed aside, told you're not good enough. Don't let those harsh words define your worth. Be patient, hold fast to your dignity, and prove yourself through action. Truth and belief will speak even when you least expect it. I learned this from the days I was called the adopted kid, from the desperate nights in Fresh Path's tiny office, and from the moments I thought I couldn't go on. But I did go on, and I'm still going, because I know the greatest legacy isn't money or power. It's the honor and integrity we leave for the next generation. Patient, 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 patient.